Hello and welcome to Cocktails and Cannibalism. This webinar is being brought to you by the Nantucket Historical Association. My name is Bob and our presentation today will be about 20 minutes followed by questions and answers. We have a nautical term we use here on Nantucket, GAM, G-A-M. Perhaps you've run into it in your travels. It is thought to originally have been a Nantucket term for a gathering of whales. Over time, it became synonymous with a gathering of whale ships. Now picture yourself, you're on a whale ship with 20 other men. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The same jokes, the same stories over and over and over. Along comes another whale ship and you would hove to and you'd hold a gam. You'd exchange stories, you'd exchange jokes, maybe you're sending mail home, or maybe you're getting mail. So these sessions became known as GAMs and the stories themselves known as GAMs. Now, as you can understand though, as these GAMs have been passed down, things have been perhaps left out, or perhaps it wasn't exciting enough for the giver, so they added things. A GAM I'm going to share with you today is based on 2 first-person accounts and has been heavily researched and written about over the years. I'm going to take you back to July of 1819. It's a beautiful day on Nantucket on July, and 9 ships have been provisioned. A 10th ship is being worked on. And it's an older ship called the Essex. It's owned by Gideon Folger, and Gideon is only planning to put in a little work to the Essex. He's expecting any day a new whaling ship, so he just wants to get one more journey out of the Essex. He, of course, wants a Nantucket crew and hires first-time captain George Pollard. Pollard likewise wants a Nantucket crew, but he is only able to get his first mate, Owen Chase, and his second mate, Matthew Joy. But because of the 9 ships that have already left the harbor, he is forced to go to Cape Cod and bring down fishermen and sailors. We're now going to go up to August of 1819. It's another beautiful day on Nantucket. And as is the custom, everybody is down on the wharf. They're down on Main Street. They're on the cliff. They're there to wish him greasy luck, full sail, Godspeed. But it's an emotional time on Nantucket. For those that are leaving, they don't know when that ship will come back, or indeed if their loved ones will be on that ship. For those that are leaving, they have no idea how long they'll be gone, or indeed if they're going to come back. With Pollard on the ship departing is, in addition to his first mate and second mate, 4 teenagers that he has brought aboard. One of them is his cousin, Owen Coffin, and Owen's best friend, Charles Ramsdell. Owen Coffin's mother does not want her son going out to sea. His father perished at sea. But Pollard assures his aunt that this is going to be a wonderful and educational trip for her son, and he will take good care of him. Also aboard the ship as we depart is the cabin boy, Thomas Nickerson. 3 days out from Nantucket, the ship hits a storm. The Essex is blown down on its beam side, but luckily a gale force wind comes in the opposite direction and rights the Essex, but the damage has been done. 2 of the whale boats have broken loose and are gone. A 3rd is in need of repair. Pollard meets with his first mate, Owen Chase, and says, well, you know, the logical thing here would be to go back to Nantucket, get the supplies we need, and then be on our way. Owen Chase steps in. He's a very outspoken young man. He's an up-and-coming, wants to be a captain. He says, no, 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 no. These fishermen are very superstitious. If you go back to Nantucket, they're going to think that this is not a lucky ship, and they're going to jump ship. So with that, what Pollard is going to do is go over to the Azores and then down to the Cape Verde Islands, which was the typical supply port for the Nantucket whalers. There, they are able to get 1 more whaleboat, and they are able to have the whaleboat that needs repairs taken care of. They are now leaving for the coast of South America, with only 4 out of the 5 whale boats that should be aboard the Essex. They're going to come down and round Cape Horn, but it takes them 5 weeks just to come around Cape Horn. But by the time they reach Chile, Pollard is feeling very positive about this trip. It's only been 10 months, and he already has half his quota of oil. He's thinking it's going to be a very fast and a very profitable trip. With that, they're going to head up to the Galapagos Islands. There, they're going to load giant tortoises. These would weigh anywhere from 100 to 400 pounds. They're a rich source of fat and protein for the men, and they can live a year without water. And what they would do is stack them on their backs on the various decks of the ship so they can't be moving around. With that, Pollard is setting a course 1,500 miles west, 40 miles south of the equator. There they come across a huge pod of sperm whales. Pollard gives the order to drop 3 of the whale boats. Pollard is in one, Owen Chase is in the second, Matthew Joy is in the third. They all quickly fasten onto a whale, but in the case of Owen Chase's boat, the flukes of the whale are too close to the boat and cut a gash. He tells his men, take off your shirts, take off your jackets, try to stuff it into the gash, but it is evident that is not sufficient, and he is forced to return with his men to the Essex to make the necessary repairs. They get the boat aboard the ship, and again, Pollard, Chase being a very impetuous man, tells the men, look, just take canvas, put it over the gash, and take nails, and put them very close together all around the outside of the canvas. And the men are pounding away, and Chase looks out on the port side of the ship. And there is a whale almost as big as the 87-foot Essex. And the men are pounding away. And as Chase is watching, this whale is acting very, very strangely. It's spouting, its flukes are going back and forth. What is with this whale? Suddenly, the whale takes aim at the port side of the ship, knocks itself silly, goes down under the ship, and comes up on the starboard side. As Chase and the men watch, the whale goes up to the bow of the ship, squares off with the hull, and comes racing toward the 238-ton Essex, pushing it through the water, flooding all of its decks. Chase quickly realizes there had been significant damage to the Essex. He tells his men, go below, get tools, get weapons, get food, get anything you can, and get in the remaining whale boat. Meanwhile, Pollard likewise sees that there has been damage to the Essex and comes roaring back to confront Chase and says, my God, Mr. Chase, what has happened? And Chase replies, we have been stove by a whale. The first recorded incident of an unprovoked attack by a whale on a whaling ship. Pollard gives the order for the men to gather more tools or weapons, more food, and get in the other 2 whale boats. But he does not want to make his final determination on the fate of the Essex until the next morning. That night, the 3 boats tether off the Essex. But in the morning, it is evident to Pollard that the Essex cannot be saved. He tells his men to take down the mast and the sails of the Essex and fashion masts and sails for the whale boats. He tells them to take the wood off of the Essex and build up the sides of the whale boats. Pollard then Mace Owen Chase and says, well, the logical thing would be to go over to the Marquesas. Those would be the closest islands. Chase steps in again and says, no, 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 no. The men have heard that there are cannibals on those islands. They will not go. So with that, Pollard is setting a course 50 miles south south, where he hopes to pick up the westerly winds of the south shore of the Pacific. They are out there during the day. The hot equatorial sun is beating down on them, burning their skin. At night, the salt water is coming up over the little sides of these boats, burning their skin. Their hair is falling out. Their skin is turning gray. Their eyes are sinking into their heads. They only have 30 days supply of water and hardtack. As time goes by, the men are already looking alike. It was decided that we should go up the coast and then termed it fatal error. How many warm hearts have ceased to beat in consequence of it? A storm hits after the first week, and unfortunately, it just about contaminates all of their water and the hardtack. The men are out there, they're trying to catch flying fish in the sails of these little boats. They're trying to scrape the barnacles off the bottoms of these little boats. There was a desperate instinct that bound us together. Our sufferings during these calm days almost exceeded human belief. The hot rays of the sun beat down upon us. On day 30, Pollard sights land on what is now known as Henderson Island. There they make shore, and there are some birds, there's some eggs, and there's actually a small quantity of fresh water, but only available for a short time during low tide. After a week there, it becomes evident to Pollard that this island cannot support 20 men. So he gives the order to get back in the boats to proceed on to South America. 3 of the men say, absolutely not. We will not get back into those boats and go back out there. Now put yourself in that position. Would you be one of the 3 men that elects to stay on an unknown island someplace out in the Pacific, not knowing will you ever be found or will you die here? Or would you be one of the 17 or so others that are getting back into those 3 little boats and going back out there, again, not knowing, will you ever see the coast of South America, or will you die at sea? The 3 boats leave, and shortly after, Matthew Joy, the second mate, passed away. It was felt that he was probably ill when they left Nantucket, being subject to the environment and deprived of food and water. He succumbed early in life. His body was given a burial at sea, which is to sew him into his clothes and sink him into the water. In time, his boat broke away from the other 2 and has never been found. Our second officer died without a straggle. His loss threw a gloom over us not easily effaced. In time, Pollard's and Chase's boats broke away. In Chase's boat, as the men started to pass away, they had to make a decision. Did they give them a burial at sea, or did they consume them for the betterment of the others? As time passed, they realized they had to consume them for the betterment of the others. On day 89, Chase's boat is found by a British whaling ship. Again, they come across this little boat, and these are just bones in the bottom of this little boat. These couldn't possibly be human beings. But Chase recovers, and he actually returns to Nantucket. And believe it or not, he kept a logbook of all 89 days out at sea. And when he got back to Nantucket, he had it published, much to the disdain of the Nantucketers, who thought that he should not be profiting off of the sail and the tragedy of the Essex. He went on to get his dream and became quite a successful whaling captain out of both New Bedford and Nantucket. But as he grew older, it is said that he had very severe headaches. And by the time he was 70, he had been declared legally insane. And when they went up to his house after he died, which still stands on Orange Street, they found pockets of food and water all through the house, because he evidently had such a morbid fear of ever being hungry and thirsty again. As for Pollard, in his boat, they're faring no better. As the men are passing, they have to make the similar decision. Do they give them a burial at sea, or do they consume them for the betterment of the others? Pollard eventually is left with 3 other men. He's got with him his cousin, Owen Coffin, Owen's best friend, Charles Ramsdell, and 1 other man. Young Charles Ramsdell, coming from a good Nantucket whaling family, decides to invoke a custom of the sea, to draw lots to see which one of them should be sacrificed for the good of the others. The lots are drawn, and unfortunately, it falls to young Owen Coffin. Pollard immediately steps in and says, "Young Owen, if you do not like your lot, I will challenge any man." And young Owen, again, coming from a good Nantucket whaling family, says, "I like my lot as well as any of the others." They then, again, in keeping with the custom, draw lots to see who will do the deed. Unfortunately, it falls to his best friend, Charles Ramsdell. The deed is done, and they consume him. Within a few days, the 4th man does pass away, so if they had waited a little longer, it would not have been necessary to have actually drawn lots. On day 93, Pollard's boat is found by a Nantucket whaling ship. Again, these are just bones in the bottom of the ship. I mean, boat, they just couldn't possibly be human beings. But Pollard is brought aboard the ship and actually has enough strength to tell the captain of the whaling ship where the 3 men were, and they were eventually saved. Pollard returned to Nantucket almost 2 years to the day, August of 1821. As the ship came into the harbor, again, as was the custom, everybody was down on the wharf. They were down on the cliff. They were on Main Street. But by this time, everybody on Nantucket knew what had happened to the Essex. And as Pollard got off the ship and walked up the wharf and up Main Street to his home on Center Street, there was no cheering, there was no jeering, there was just absolute silence. Because everybody knew on Nantucket that what happened to the Essex was just the way of the sea. Pollard was actually given a second chance and became the captain of the 2 brothers. Unfortunately, his career was cut short. The 2 brothers hit an unmarked shoal off the Hawaiian Islands, sunk, but all the men were saved. Pollard returned to Nantucket, a very despondent and broken man, but became quite beloved in the community. He became the night watchman. And every night he'd walk up and down the streets of Nantucket, lighting all of the oil lamps. And every year he would fast on the anniversary of the sinking of the Essex in honor of all those men who were so tragically lost. But there was one person on this island who would never look or speak to him again. Young Owen Coffin's mother, his aunt. How do we know all this? Well, we have Owen Chase's logbook. 30 years later, Thomas Nickerson, the cabin boy, wrote his own account. It was lost up until 1980 and was found by accident in an attic in Penn Yan, New York, brought to the Nantucket Historical Association, and proved to be authentic. In fact, the drawings that you've been looking at during this webinar are from Thomas Nickerson's logbook. We're now going to go back out to sea, and it's 1840. And there's a young man on a whaling ship by the name of William Henry Chase, Owen's son. Along comes another whaling ship, and they're having a gam, much as we're doing today. And he meets another young whaler by the name of Herman Melville. And during the gam, young William shares with Melville his father's logbook. Melville becomes totally entranced. The idea of the giant whale stoving the ship. And he goes on to write a book about it. You might have heard about it, Moby-Dick. When Melville wrote Moby-Dick, he was a whaler, but he had never been to Nantucket. He did come to Nantucket in 1852, the year after Moby-Dick was published. And he came with the express purpose of meeting George Pollard. He stayed up at the Ocean House, which is the top at Broad Street, and Pollard's house was right across the street. And he said at the time, you know, maybe to these islanders, he was a nobody. But I've just got to believe, I mean, what kind of integrity, what kind of strength does it take for a man to have endured such a tragedy and seen all his men lost at sea? Unfortunately, the only artifact that we have in our collection from the Essex is a twine that was done by Benjamin Lawrence during his days at sea. He took pieces of thread and fiber and wove them all together with the hopes that he would have something when if he ever came back to Nantucket to remind him of the ordeal that he had gone through. So that's our GAM for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Hi, Bob. We have a few questions here.
Okay.
Starting from the top. Question is, when the men were consumed, were they cooked or were they just eaten raw?
They were essentially, actually written documentation that explained to whalers which most vital organs that you would eat first. In some cases, they were able to put a little bit in the bottom of the boat, so they didn't always eat it raw. But there was actually a protocol that went with this, should you be in that kind of a case.
Bob, you're coming in very garbled. Do you want to try and mute yourself and unmute?
Okay. That.
I don't know if you're better or not, but
No,
you're still coming in very garbled. I'm going to ask the next question and then mute myself. Did they keep the bones? Were they brought back and buried?
No, the bones were sacrificed to the sea. They did not bring the bones back.
Okay, they were sacrificed to the sea. They didn't bring them back. The third question is, Coffin, Pollard, and Chase are familiar names. Where and how are they memorialized on Nantucket?
George Pollard's house is there on Center Street, and there's a plaque in front of it. Owen Chase's house is on Orange Street, and it is still there, but I do not believe that there is a plaque on it. As for the coffins, there are many, many thousands of coffins. It was one of the original founding families of Nantucket.
We've got, Mary, why don't we try to disconnect that one microphone, the big microphone, and pick it up on the webcam, see if that's better. She's ignoring me, okay. Where is the original Owen Chase journal today? Does the NHA have it?
I do not believe we have the original Owen Chase. We have copies of it, and there's copies of it, but I'm not sure who actually is in possession of the original Owen Chase log.
It's an interesting question. How did Melville develop Moby-Dick? Was the story more by interviewing Pollard or from the journals?
From the journals. He never met Pollard until after Moby-Dick was published in 1852. He based it off of what he got from Owen Chase's log, as well his own experiences being a whaler at sea.
You know, Bob, I think I want to ask you to answer the question about Coffin, Pollard, and Chase on Nantucket, because you were very garbled and you had some great information there.
Okay. Pollard's house is at the top of town at the corner of Broad and Center Street. There is a placard out in front of it. Owen Chase's house is on Orange Street, but I do not believe that there is any kind of a plaque outside of it. As for the Coffins, Coffins were one of the founding families of Nantucket, and there are many, many generations and hundreds and thousands of Coffins all over New England, and at this point, probably all over the world.
Another fun question. What kind of food is hardtack?
Hardtack is like a biscuit. It's a very dry, mealy type thing. It is not what you'd call an attractive thing to eat. It was just more or less some protein type of substance, and that you would take down with water.
Okay. How many other documented cases have there been of unprovoked whale attacks?
I honestly don't know how many attacks were after the Essex. The Essex was the first documented attack, of a whale on a whale ship. But I can't tell you how many have been documented since then.
And a question, I think we talked about a little bit, but did they catch any whales on this voyage?
No, no. The Essex sank, and with it, all of the oil that they had already processed was at the bottom of the sea. So essentially, those that did survive never got paid, because a whaler's salary was based on a percentage of the sale of the oil when it was sold when they came back to port. So any of those survivors actually had no income at all from that whole trip.
And what was the idea or purpose of collecting the Galapagos turtles?
They were a rich source of fat and protein for the men. They could live a year without water, and they could drink the blood.
This is kind of a tough one, Bob, but if the consumption of human flesh was the way of the sea, does this suggest that it happened on other occasions? And do you know
definitely.
of any?
There are other records of cannibalism having been taking place. This is probably the most famous just because of the tie to Melville.
Did any of the profits from Moby-Dick help the families of Pollard, Chase, or the Owen or the others?
I do not believe at all, no.
And do you know if the survivors of the Essex resented Melville for profiting from their tragedy? Sort of how did anyone feel about it? Do we know?
I think Pollard was kind of taken back when Melville came to visit. I'm not sure that at that point, Moby-Dick wasn't the big success that it did happen to get into the 1900s. So, it wasn't that famous a book at that point that people would point to it and, look back at the Essex as being the source of it.
Are there Pollard, Chase, and Coffin descendants on Nantucket today?
Oh, definitely. There are descendants of all the founding families of Nantucket.
Do we know how the logbook ended up in Penn Yan, New York?
It is believed that it was Nickerson probably gave it to someone in the hopes of finding an agent who would publish it. And it probably just was passed person to person, and whoever had it probably last threw it up in an attic. And it was just by chance that when they were cleaning this attic in Penn Yan, New York, they came across this manuscript. They started to read it, saw the tie to Nantucket, and then brought it to the Nantucket Historical Association.
We have actually a question and somebody who answered the question, which is, what number is Chase's house on Orange Street? And we actually have someone who came in and said Chase's house is 74 Orange Street.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
The question, when did Nantucket whaling expeditions come to an end?
The Oak was the last whaling ship to leave Nantucket in 1869.
Did any of the families on the Essex receive correspondence during the early part of them being near Chile?
Probably. I mean, it was a fairly common thing that people would write letters home, and then you'd come across another whaling ship going in the opposite direction. So you would send mail home, and possibly receive mail.
Do we have any further word from or about the three that stayed on the island and didn't return to the ship?
They were saved at about day 100. Pollard was able to tell the captain of the Nantucket whaling ship where they were, and they did send someone to save them.
And we have a question about the photo that we showed of the Jared Coffin house.
Okay.
I mean, why was that shown?
The Jared Coffin house, when Melville visited in 1852, was called the Ocean House, and that is where he stayed.
And it's also across the street from
it's also
Pollard's
across
house.
the street from Pollard's house, yes.
Interesting conjecture here. Could a less elderly whale ship have survived the attack?
Probably not. It was a huge whale. I mean, it was as big as the 87-foot Essex, and the Essex was a good-sized whale ship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did they drink the turtle's blood while they were alive?
Probably not. They would kill them, but then drink the blood.
Okay. Has anybody ever recovered the wreck of the Essex?
No, nothing has ever been found. The only artifact that we have is the string from Benjamin Lawrence. There supposedly is a chest in our collection that might have come from the Essex, but no one has had any significant findings from the wreck itself.
Okay. We have somebody here who'd like you to repeat the answer to the first question about whether or not the folks were cooked or eaten raw.
What they would have done is to probably cut out, though there was sort of a guidebook at those points that told you which organs would offer you the most fat and protein. And you might eat those raw, and then other parts of the body you might cook if they could get a little fire going, perhaps in the bottom of the boats, and just cook it a little bit. But it's kind of a little of both.
Okay. Who had financed the Essex voyage? Was it Pollard? And if so, did it bankrupt him?
No, Pollard was hired by Gideon Folger. Gideon Folger owned the ship. And he and his partners financed the trip of the Essex. And then Gideon Folger then in turn hired Pollard to be his captain.
Okay. What percentage of money would each different crew member receive after a voyage? For example, a cabin boy versus the captain.
A captain could typically get a percentage of perhaps anywhere from 1/8 to 1/12. And the sliding scale of the that would go down to a cabin boy might, if he was lucky, get 1/250th, perhaps 1/300th. It was a very unique scale based completely on your skill base. So it had nothing to do of race or anything else. It was completely skill driven. And so what you would do, a young Nantucket boy, as soon as he came back from saying being a cabin boy, would immediately sign up on the next ship with the hopes of moving up the ladder of the lays and getting a bigger percentage, and then perhaps someday be a first mate or perhaps even a captain of his own ship.
Okay. Is the twine on display at the NHA?
Yes, it is on display in the NHA in the Essex Gallery that we have.
What other books have been written about the Essex? This question is particularly interested about nonfiction.
There are many. Probably the most authoritarian book at this point is called In the Heart of the Sea, that was written by Nathaniel Philbrook, who is a local Nantucket author who spent a great deal of time researching all of the various accounts of the Essex and came out with his book several years ago.
Okay. Was the status of Pollard's job as a night watchman considered a menial job, or how would he have been regarded?
Yeah, I mean, it was clearly a step down from being a captain.
Okay. Were any of the characters in Moby-Dick based on Essex crewmen?
Not that we believe, no. Melville kind of made them up, as well as the names.
Okay. Did the families of the deceased crew members sue Gideon Folger, or was it part of doing business?
It was part of doing business. That was the way of the sea.
Okay.
You had to expect it if you were from a whaling family.
Okay. And would Pollard and Chase's families be considered as prominent as the family's Coffin on Nantucket?
They're old line Nantucket families, certainly. I mean, the Coffins were one of the founding families. The Chases and the Pollards kind of were a second tier of families that came into Nantucket.
Here's an interesting one. It's just a comment. How psyched would they have been to have the Panama Canal? Well, actually, they didn't. They just went back to South America, but.
Right. They went around Cape Horn.
Yeah. Let's see. Did the experience of the Essex reinforce superstitions of the whalers?
I honestly don't know. I mean, there were all sorts of things that, you know, the superstitions that went with the whalers and whether a ship was lucky or not. And it's hard to say.
Did Folger get out of the whaling business after the Essex?
Oh, no, he went on. He financed, in fact, he put as little repairs as he could into the Essex because he was expecting any day a brand new whaling ship.
Okay. And we've got one more here. And I think we're just about wrapping up, which is how much money would the captain get paid in one trip in today's dollars?
With a good haul of oil and a good market price, it could be several thousands of dollars that they would make off of one trip.
And in today's dollars, that would be a lot.
It could be, you know, 30, 40, at least $1,000, probably even more.
Hmm. Okay, a question. Would this gam have happened in person if not for COVID-19?
We do give, prior to COVID-19, we do give the Essex Gam several times during the day at the Whaling Museum on Nantucket.
Are there any records of an albino whale during Essex time period relating to the great white whale?
No, we believe Melville made up the albino whale.
Okay. And we have lots of folks saying thanks and great job, very interesting, love the gam.
Thank you.
And keep an eye on the NHA website, and our newsletters will be doing more sessions in the future. So long, everyone.
So long.